Good day, all you wonderful people. Welcome to the program, Changing the World with me, Lorette Dye. Today I want to talk to you about Matthew 5. That is basically the first sermon of Jesus that we have a record of. It is very interesting because what I found is that people take one or two of those verses and they focus on that, forgetting the context. And therefore I want to color in the context of that part in the Bible for you today. We often hear that people say, you must turn the other cheek, for example. And we all take that as a fact. And we feel guilty if someone hurts us and we respond with anger, for example, or we don't just step back. If we look at Matthew 5, yes, that is one of the things that is written there, but there's so many other things that are written there, and there's a context to what Jesus said there. And I want to focus now for just a few moments on that context. First of all, it is shortly after Jesus' ministry started, and he was talking to people that were Jews and that tried to keep the law. And he was talking to average people that weren't perfect, but that really wanted to serve God. And at this early stage, at the beginning of his ministry, he didn't want to reveal himself yet. He couldn't, because he knew there was a time of ministry before his crucifixion. And if he came in too quickly and too strong, he would cause his time to be earlier than what it was supposed to be. See, God has all of this planned out perfectly. There was a time of teaching. There was a time where Jesus became more well known as time went by. But he was still careful in what he said and that he wouldn't offend the Jewish people. It was important because he had to get his message out first before his time to be crucified came. If you understand that the Bible is centered about before Jesus' crucifixion and after his crucifixion, then immediately it is easier for you to understand the Bible and the message of the Bible. Before Jesus' crucifixion, he chose a group of people, namely the Jews, and he walked a path with them. And part of that path was that he used them as an example of how he is, of what he wants to do and the relationship he wants with people. He wanted himself to be known, that people can understand what he expects and how he responds to being rejected, to being disobeyed, and that we can understand who God is. And, we can never fully know God, of course, but we can have a higher understanding of him and who he is. In Matthew, Jesus being on earth was still in the period of time before his crucifixion. Just to make sure that you know and understand what changed after his crucifixion was that we were not under the law anymore, but under the guidance of the Spirit of God. And Paul explains it to us very well, where he says, after you were set free, why do you go back to the prison of the law? And he also says, if you want to keep the law, then you will be judged by the law. But if you accept the work that Jesus has done, you will be under his grace. Now, what does that have to do, and how are we supposed then to interpret Matthew 5? We are talking about what changed before versus after Jesus' crucifixion, and how we should interpret Matthew 5. That was one of Jesus' first sermons. Before Jesus' crucifixion, we were still under the law, but after his crucifixion, we were under his grace, and we are guided by his Spirit. And just to confirm that for you, I want to read for you a few verses. Galatians 3 verse 13 says, "The law says we are under a curse for not always obeying it, but Christ took away that curse. He changed places with us and put himself under that curse. The scriptures say, anyone who is hung on a tree is under a curse." And Galatians 4 verse 5, God did this so that he could buy the freedom of those who were under the law. God's purpose was to make us his children. And Galatians 5 verse 18, "But if you let the Spirit lead you, you are not under law." So it is clear that the Bible teaches us that there's a difference between before the time of Jesus' crucifixion and the time after Jesus' crucifixion. If we then come back to Matthew 5, where Jesus gave his first sermon, he started off with talking about positive things. He said, great blessings belong to those who are sad now. God will comfort them. Matthew 5 verse 4. And he continues to say a blessing over people that are good people. Matthew 5 verse 7, great blessings belong to those who show mercy to others. Mercy will be given to them. Then he moves on to a next part where he talks about salt and light. In Matthew 5 verse 13, he says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its taste, it cannot be made salty again." And then he continues in that way. Matthew 5 verse 14, "You are the light that shines for the world to see. You are like a city built on a hill that cannot be hidden." So you can see that he starts his sermon with positives, with good, with encouragement, with telling people that they are good in them. Then he talks about that Christ came to fulfill the law and not to destroy what happened before he came. And here is again one of the parts where people get stuck. And they will ask the question, doesn't that mean that the law is still important? What it means when he says that he came to fulfill the law is that he is the one that makes perfect. Whereas the law tried to explain to you how to be perfect, and it wasn't possible. He comes to fulfill it and make sure that we are perfect and blameless through him standing in for us and his blood that is at this stage when he's talking going to be shed for our sins. He is standing in, and through that he is fulfilling the law and the purpose of the law. What the law was supposed to do but couldn't, Christ has come to do. We are talking today about Matthew 5, and I am maybe in a way challenging the way that you've looked at this part in the Bible before. We looked at the context that it was still before Jesus was crucified. He started his ministry. He didn't want to offend anybody. and he couldn't be 100% clear on who he was and what his purpose on earth was at that stage. We talked about the first part of Matthew 5, and now I want to continue. The next part in Matthew 5, Jesus says to the Jews that is sitting in front of him, and this is Matthew 5 verse 19, a person should obey every command in the law, even one that does not seem important. Now Jesus is saying this because, like we do today, the Jews in that time decided for themselves which part in the scriptures they should take serious and which parts they decided and feel was not important. A very simple example. If you look at the law, we decided that keeping the Sabbath is not important. There's other things that we focus on a lot, but there are certain things that we decided it's just not important. And now Jesus is saying to the people that did exactly that same thing, where they decided what is important in the law and what is not, he says to them, a person should obey every command in the law, even one that does not seem important. And then in verse 20, he continues to say, I tell you that you must do better than the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. If you are not more pleasing to God than they are, you will never enter God's kingdom. So he's now saying to them, you shouldn't ignore some of the rules. You should do better than even the people that seems to do very well. And then he starts with an example. He says, Matthew 5 verse 21, you have heard that it was said to you, to our people long ago, you must not murder anyone. Any person who commits murder will be judged. And then in 22, but I tell you, don't be angry with anyone. If you are angry with others, you will be judged. And if you insult someone, you will be judged by the high court. And if you call someone a fool, you will be in danger of the fire of hell. So, what Jesus is saying here, and you can read through this whole part, because that is what he continues to say. He tells them, this is what the law says. For example, in the part that I've read, you shouldn't commit murder. And then he says, but that's not good enough. God is actually expecting even more. And he continues in that line. Matthew 5 verse 27, you have heard that it was said, you must not commit adultery. And in 28, but I tell you that if a man looks at a woman and wants to sin sexually with her, he has already committed that sin with her in his mind. Now here is what you need to understand. Jesus, in this part, was saying to them, even if you keep the law, it is not good enough in front of God. He is expecting more. He is expecting absolute perfection. And what you must understand about this part is not that Jesus was saying to us, be perfect. He was saying to us, you can't. Look at my examples. Listen to my examples. Think of your own life. Think of your own ability. And I am telling you that it is impossible to be perfect. And here is the key and the crux of the message. He couldn't say it straight out, but he is saying it to us here. If you understand how to read this part, he is saying, so do you see that you can't do it without me? You can't be perfect. I came to make you perfect. I came to take all your imperfectness, all your sin on me, because without me, it is impossible for you. And then many people take these parts out of context and they say to you, this is how you should live. He says, you must turn the other cheek. You must not get angry. You must not look at someone and desire them. They take this out of context and make people feel guilty because they can't reach these standards. But I am telling you, it is not the standard that this part in the Bible is about. This part in the Bible is about that we are incapable of perfection. And therefore, we need Jesus. And therefore, He came for us. How amazing, how beautiful, how merciful does that make God? I will come back to the implications of this for you. We are talking today about how to interpret Matthew 5, and we've come to the conclusion that Jesus is not saying to people here that you have to do everything perfect and you've got to never get angry or never desire or never call someone a fool. He is using it as an example that we understand that we can't do this on our own. We need Him, and that we understand why He came to earth to be crucified for us, that His blood can wash us from all our sins, that we can stand clean before God, because that is the only thing that is good enough for God. We can only stand in front of Him if we are clean and white and perfect, and by ourselves that is impossible. In other words, this part is actually talking about God's grace, the big work and sacrifice that He made for us to save us. Whereas some people use Matthew 5 to tell people how they should live, this is actually about God's grace and about God's mercy and why He needed to come and save us. We can rejoice in this and be glad in this. It is so amazing. And once we understand this, we will also understand how precious God is, how amazing God is, and how much we owe our lives to Him, and how much we have to be thankful for towards God. God is our provider. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with the following verses. In Matthew 5, verse 48, the very last verse, Jesus then says, "What I am saying is that you must be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." And in Hebrew 10, verse 14, "With one sacrifice, Christ made His people perfect forever. They are the ones who are being made holy." And Hebrews 11, verse 40, God planned something better for us. He wanted to make us perfect. You listen to Changing the World with me, Lorette Dye. Remember, changing the world starts with you. And remember, don't let the day go by without laughing, dancing, singing, and sitting at God's feet. I am, as always, grateful for this time that you spent with me. Be safe and be blessed.